We're sitting with Emmanuel Tchividjian, Senior Vice President and Chief Ethics Officer at Reuter Finn. He's held positions with the government of Switzerland and with the New England Israel Chamber of Commerce. He's past president and current ethics officer for the New York chapter of the Public Relations Society of America, as well as a member of the National Board of Ethics and Professional Standards. We're pleased to have you share some of your experiences and thoughts with us today. Welcome and thank you.
I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. Let's start by talking about how you got started in public relations.
So I think my history in public relations is unusual. So it can't really be a model for students, but there may be some values in maybe being open to something unexpected. I came to PR by accident. I've been involved in communication. I did give interviews in the past to media. I wrote a press release once, but that was about it. I came to PR because of a crisis that I was involved in. Not personally, I was personally involved, but it was not my crisis. It was the issue of the Swiss government and the Swiss banks and the Holocaust. That was back in 1997. Because I was involved and I cared about the issue, I had to attend an event or a hearing in Congress in 1997, which was about the Swiss bank and the Holocaust, and met there Mr. David Finn, who is the co-founder and chairman of the firm, and Reuter Finn at the time was representing the Swiss government. I'd grown up in Switzerland, I had many contacts there, I was involved, so he gave me his card and said, come and see me. I did. We sat. He asked me why I was there. I said I didn't know. He asked me what we would be talking about. I said I didn't have a clue. And then we talked. And at one point he asked me if the Swiss government had paid me for what I had done. And I said no. And he looked at me a little strange. He said, why would this guy do this for no pay? But then he realized that this was a matter I really cared about. So we talked, and one thing led to another, and I joined the firm, and that's almost 13 years ago. So the process of once I joined was quite intense because I had general concept, but no experience. So it was a steep learning curve, but one I recommend.
Mm-hmm. You're now the Chief Ethics Officer at Reuter Finn. Can you explain for us what a Chief Ethics Officer does? What are your day-to-day responsibilities?
The word chief is, both words, chief and officers, can be questioned. Number one, I'm a chief with no Indian. I'm the only person in charge of ethics. And the word officer is used because I need the title in order to be a member of an organization called the Ethics and Compliance Officers Association. For me, my role is double. First, it's in making sure that we, as an agency, do the right thing when we deal with our job, our clients, the media, and also make sure that as a company, we do the right thing with employees. So there are issues, internal issues, and there are external issues.
So what's the biggest challenge that you faced during your career?
You know, I think a career is faced with challenges. You know, when one challenge is met, the next one appears. I can't really pinpoint on one. I would say that I wish that more people would come and speak to me freely before things happen. But I think that's true for most people in that position.
Let's talk a little bit more about your career. So who has had the most significant influence on your career and why?
Undoubtedly, Mr. David Finn. He is 89 years old. He started the company with his friend Bill Reuter in 1948, so it's 62 years ago. And in the early 50s, he started an ethics committee at the firm. So he has been at the center and the soul of the company's concern about doing the right thing. So he's been a mentor, he's been an example. I'm still today surprised. He still is able to surprise me in the way he reacts to events and incidents that happen at the firm.
Can you give us an example of that?
I'll give you a great story. We had hired a journalist who used to work for PR Week, a magazine, and then had gone to another PR firm, had left the magazine and went to another PR firm, and then was laid off. So he was looking for a job, and he was a good writer, and we had a good connection. So we hired him. And his role was to be a writer for the agency. Journalists are usually good writers, and he was a good writer. Mm-hmm. But things were not going very well. Either he was not looking hard enough for a job or for work, or people didn't trust him. We're not sure. But we felt responsible. We hired him. It was not really his fault. So we kept him on. And then one day he came to see my boss. I was not in that day, about something. And then at the end he said, "Oh, by the way, you'll see something in the media tomorrow, but don't worry, it's nothing." Next morning, front page of Old Wires, which is another PR publication. Reuter Finn's Dobros, his name was Larry Dobro, settled with the SEC for insiders trading. They settled, so it was alleged that while he was at the other agency, he was working on a small bank that was going to be acquired by Wells Fargo. Called his father, "Hey, Dad." His father said, "Thank you, son." Went to the bank, opened a separate account, bought the stock of that small bank, and when the merger was announced, the stock price went up, and then he sold it. He aligned all the red flags for the SEC to find him. So the question was, what do we do? Ethics often starts with, what should we do? Mm-hmm. What should I do? So we had a meeting of the executive committee and went around the table, and the reactions were, he has to go. Reuter Finn is dedicated and takes ethics seriously. We can't have someone among our staff that did this. Others said, "I don't trust him. If he did that, maybe we should close our door when he's around." And then came David's turn. And he said no. He said, number one, it's not right to let someone go because it makes you look better. Number two, he said Larry's under a lot of stress because of what happened, the media, the legal fees. It wouldn't be right to take his job away from him now and add an extra burden. And number three, and this is what surprised me the most, he said, what about the concept of forgiveness? So I thought, wow, you're chairman of a large company that has over 500 employees and millions in billing, and you talk about the concept of forgiveness.
Good. So what are the most important issues or the enduring truths that you've learned in the career that you've had in public relations?
Most important issues?
Yeah.
You mean in public relation or in ethics?
Ethics would be appropriate.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, in your career, what do you think are the most important issues and the enduring truths that you've learned through your career?
I think that, ethics, there's a debate as what's the difference between ethics and morality. And different people have different definition. For me, morality is more personal, and ethics is more at the workplace. even if you put morality on the side and you look at the consequence of unethical behavior, the damaging consequence, the sheer stupidity sometimes surprises me more than the immorality. Because in today's world, more I think because of media and because of the way we run our lives, you can't get away with anything. And people still think they can. People still think you can fool someone for a long time, and it's no longer true. So I think that more and more people realize that ethics is a very important component of what you do. Someone said, can you make a business case for ethics? And the answer was, if you don't have ethics, you won't have business. Maybe not right now, but soon enough. So I think there is a more general understanding that, especially because of more recent scandals, that ethics is essential.
Let's talk a little bit about ethics then. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about ethical public relations, and since that's your area of expertise. So in your professional opinion, what constitutes ethical public relations? What is that?
I think ethics is essentially an issue of values. And as I mentioned yesterday, there are different types of situation. You have the right versus wrong, and that very often, that situation very often is more legal one than an ethical one. Everybody knows that stealing is unethical, but it's also illegal. And then you have situations of right versus right, when you have conflicting values, conflicts of legitimate values. That's where it gets very, very interesting. And then you have wrong versus wrong. That's in the medical field, where you have a problem and there's no perfect solution, and you try to take the best solution or the least harmful solution. So in public relation, in communication, and communication involves everything we do. But unless there is trust, the value of the exchange is very, very low. Trust is essential in any exchange, in any communication. So in PR, whether it's with journalists, whether it's with clients, whether it's with the government, whether it's with the media, having that trust is the most important thing. And once you lose it, it's almost lost forever. It's very rare to regain trust once you've lost it. So that is really a guideline for everything we do. It may sound like expedient at the time, at the moment, but the consequences can be devastating. You have, clients come and go, but the relationship with the media will stay. And once you mislead a journalist, you will never have his trust again.
You talk about trust being the key. How can an organization, an agency, build trust? How can it maintain trust in an ethical way with the media and with the publics? What are some of the ways that they do that?
Well, being truthful, being open, being transparent, being able to say when you don't have the answer or when you can't deliver the answer, being able to say it. This is confidential, I'm not allowed to tell you. Of course, never lying. And then reputation is, you build reputation. And it can take a lifetime to build and a few minutes to lose. I think the reaction also, because things happen, we make mistakes. We all know that. But the reaction to the mistakes you make also is essential in keeping that trust. People accept that you make mistakes. We all make mistakes. People will forgive you for a mistake, but they will be much harder to forgive if you try to cover it up, to lie, to blame someone else. That's harder to forgive. I have this great illustration of a woman was doing her nails with nail polish, and by accident a drop of polish went into her daughter's eye, That was the accident. And then the reaction to the accident was to take some solvent and try to remove it, destroy the girl's eye. So sometimes in panic, we do very, very stupid things, and the real damage is done in our reaction to the mistake. I think Richard Nixon is a good example. He didn't know about Watergate when it happened, but once he knew it, he did everything wrong, trying to cover up.
So what's the role of economic bottom line for an agency, for an organization in ethical decision making? What role do you think the bottom line should play in making decisions ethically?
I'm not naive. You can't be an ethics officer and be naive. The bottom line is very important, but the bottom line is not the only factor in your decision. Because again, the bottom line is a short-term goal. You have to think of the long-term goal. So I'll give you an example of a situation where you have a conflict of interest between a client you have and a potential client you might get. So you can't just look at the bottom line and saying this client is going to pay us twice as much. You have to look, and then so let's drop this client. You have to look at so many other factors before you make that decision. But it is an important factor. Obviously, we're in business.
Mm-hmm. So getting back to your own experience, what education or previous experience, professional experience, do you think best prepared you for your role now and for the rigors of ethical decision making, and in your case, guiding people to make ethical decisions? What experience do you think helped you or prepared you the most for the role that you play now?
When I'm thinking of your students, I think being very current in what's going on in the world, and I always was very, very interested in not just politics, but social issues, is helpful, because once you join the firm, you have to deal with so many different aspects of life that if you have some base knowledge or experience, that's going to be helpful. Being able to listening really closely, sometimes asking yourself, what is the person really tell me? Because we wear different levels of masks, and what is the person not telling me? And I think in terms of ethics, you want to help. That's a basic element. You want to be helpful. You're not a judge, you're not a prosecutor. You are trying to help people avoid making mistakes, and then in dealing with mistakes when they happen. So I think I had those attributes.
So, and we got to this a little bit before, but how have recent ethical lapses in business, for example, Enron, affected the practice of public relations? How did those scandals affect the way that you see public relations being practiced?
I think the fact that Enron comes up in those conversations, and so many others, brought an awareness of the potential devastating effect of unethical behavior. In terms of PR, you can't communicate to the world something that you're not. Sooner or later, it will show. In terms of ethics, culture is essential. Enron had a ethics code that was about 3 or 4 inch thick, but it was not part of the culture. Employees at Enron were encouraged to take shortcuts, almost expected to take shortcuts. They knew they wouldn't get in trouble for doing things they knew were wrong, because it was not the culture of the company. So building culture is not something you can do overnight. It takes training, it takes experience, it takes a track record, it takes a feeling of belonging of the employees. Someone said, you know that you have an ethics culture when you hear someone say, this is the way we do it here, or we don't do this here. And the we is very important. It's not they, it's we. So people feel they're part of a group that has values that they can adhere to.
So what do you see as the influences of media on contemporary ethical decision-making in public relations? What role does the media play in the way that public relations is making decisions?
Are you talking about new media or media in general?
Actually, the next question I was going to ask you
About
was
new
about
media.
new media. So we can talk maybe traditional media and then maybe go to new media. Or if you want to answer that
No,
together,
I mean,
you're more than welcome to.
The new media brings a new element, but of course in public relations you deal with the media. Not always. People sometimes confuse public relation with publicity, but we have a wider range of what public relation is, and for me, public relation executive is someone who is an advisor, counselor in communication. So it can be for a CEO who's writing a speech or going to talk to the shareholders. It doesn't always involve the press. It can be internal communication, but it involves the press very often, especially for commercial clients. And so ethics and the media, it's the same thing. You have to build trust with journalists. You have to the interest of your clients to defend, but you have your own reputation at stake. So you have to make sure there's a correct balance. You have to make sure you're comfortable doing what you do. Someone said, never do anything you don't want published in the front page of next morning newspaper. Or don't write an email that you would be embarrassed to read in court. We have to know that these things last. I had one experience where we had a problem with a client, and it was going to be news, and I knew the story, and we had really done nothing wrong, but there was some explanations. So I talked to David, Finn, and the executive committee, and they allowed me to speak freely to one journalist that trusted me. So I told her the story first, and she wrote a wonderful front page article for the press with the exact truth of what had happened. And this would not have happened unless she had trusted me and I trusted her. I had to trust her too, because she could take my words and turn them around and say different things. I've been on Fox. They called, I gave an interview and a letter, and I saw how the media can mislead you, can take a quote, put it in another context to give a totally different story. So there's also some unethical behavior on the media as well, especially when they already have a point of view and they're just trying to get something you said to reinforce that view.
So let's talk about new media a little bit. Has new media, including the internet and social media, made the public relations industry more or less ethical? Has there been an influence? Are journalists still the watchdogs of business? And how will technology influence the public relations industry in years to come?
It's like three
questions in
questions.
one.
I better read them again.
Right.
Give me the
We can
first
start
one.
with has new media, including the internet and social media, made public relations more or less ethical?
You know, I don't think you can be more or less ethical. I think you have to have a basic concern. Ethics is trying to do the best you can with the information you have and with your values. I think most people think they're ethical, and I think most people want to be ethical, but yet things happen because of lack of reflection, lack of sharing with others and looking at others people's experience, and because of speed. You have to do something right away. You somehow have a feeling this is not just right, but you just ignore it and go ahead, and then, oh my God. I think people realize that the speed at which things are done with the new media and also the scope of the coverage of what you are going to do, it has made people slowly but surely more aware of the dangers of ethical lapses.
Some people say that there's more transparency in social media, that organizations are required to be more transparent because there a lot of people can participate in the conversation.
Right. Absolutely, because the public has multiplied in numbers, and exposure is so much increased. The visibility is greater. So of course there's more scrutiny.
Mm-hmm. So do you think journalists are still the watchdogs of business, or have people become the watchdogs through social media?
I guess it depends on journalists. Some are not really a watchdog, they're just interested in business or have personal agendas. It's a great role to have. I hope many stay that way. But the fact that the public can become journalists in themselves with blogs and probably diminishes some of that role.
And then how do you think technology will influence the public relations industry in years to come? Do you think it's that social media is here to stay, or is this another fad?
No, I think it's here to stay, and it will grow. It will grow. What's next and new, I'm not sure, but I'm sure it's in the same direction. Things will never be the same again.
So do you think that younger workers today, if we can transition a little bit, do you think younger workers today are prepared for informed ethical decision makers? Ethical decision making. Do you think that younger workers today are prepared to make the kind of decisions in public relations that they need to make?
Well, it all depends on their education. Depends on the college they've been to. I've talked to many young college graduates, and when we talk about ethics, yes, I had an ethics course that really counted. That's interesting. So that I think it depends. And younger employees also are more current, I think, than employees like 20, 30, 40 years ago because of new media, because of exposure to our world, and are more aware of the recent scandals. You have to be careful not to become cynical, and I think ethics can help, because there is another way, and there is the right way, and you can be proud of the work you do, you can be proud of the company you work for. With the economic situation now, you may not be as ready to leave a company than before, because you may not be able to find another job. So maybe that's not a good effect on ethics.
Mm-hmm. So what about mentoring? How important do you think mentoring is to fostering ethical decision making in the workplace?
Very, very important, because ethics touches so many different parts of what we do. We may not be able to see it, but with someone that has the experience and can see through, mentoring is key, I think.
Are you involved in mentoring? Is
Yes.
Ruderfin involved
Yes.
in
mentoring, and I've been involved in mentoring with PRSA.
Mm-hmm. To PRSA?
I actually got an award, and everybody, at the ceremony told me, you helped me so much, and I just couldn't remember where and when.
Let's talk a little bit about, let's talk about counseling and a counseling role, transition a little bit from mentoring. The aim of the Arthur W. Page Center and the Arthur Page Society is to help individuals become counselors to leadership. So how can individuals best prepare themselves for this role, best prepare themselves to be counselors to leaders in public relations?
Well, I think you have to put yourself in the person you're going to counsel's feet, or shoes, actually, and think what keeps him or her awake at night, what are the issues, what's the past, what's the history, what are the challenges, on the one hand. On the other hand, you have to be courageous. You can't be someone, if you're going to speak to the CEO, that's going to tell him what he wants to hear. And we've seen this in the political world, of people surrounding themselves with advisors that praise that person and tell him he's right. And then people with courage and integrity that will say things as they see them.
So how can individuals prepare themselves to be counselors? What are some of the things that they can do to be prepared to be a good counselor to leadership?
You mean in reading or in what kind of
Preparation as far as that, education, maybe even going back to some mentoring.
Maybe some psychology can help,
Mm-hmm.
studying psychology, because that helps in the interaction and the understanding of the other. I think that could be helpful. I think you need a dose of humility, because you can be wrong. You can be both forceful and humble at the same time. When you forceful when you know for sure, but we rarely know for sure. And you have to make sure that you always consider the person you're counseling's best interest at all times and not yours.
And you talked a little bit about this earlier. Is it important for a corporation to have an ethical mission statement or credo, and why?
I think it's important, but it's not enough. Mission statements most of the time are bland and too general and not taken seriously. What is important is if you walk the talk. What's important is if the message comes from the tone and the message comes from the top. And what is important is if it's real, and if you can show that it's real by the actions the company or the person has taken, not just a general principle of goodwill. So I usually don't take mission statement too seriously. It's necessary because you need a reference. You need to go back at one point and say, hey, this is our mission statement, this is contrary to the mission. That's an important tool, but it's not enough.
It's not enough. What about professional accreditation? Is professional accreditation necessary to guarantee ethical standards within the field of public relations? And if so, what should the standards be for accreditation that would lead to more ethical decision making, in your opinion?
I think accreditation is very important. I'm unfortunately not a member of APR, but I should be, and maybe I will. But I think highly of it because it's more than just a recognition of what you know, but it's also there's an element of education about ethics in most of those programs. I'm sure it's the same with Arthur Page Society. So I highly recommend it. I think it's very important.
And
it won't guarantee anything, but it's important. Nothing is guaranteed.
Right. What about continued education for seasoned public relations professionals? Do you think that's something that can lead to more ethical understanding? And do you also think that it's necessary? Is this something that, do you think seasoned professionals should be back in the classroom and learning about this, or is this something they can learn on the job?
I have a mixed feeling about that. Theoretically, I would think it's a good idea, but when you look at executives that are involved hours and hours a day with issues, unless it's something totally new, I don't see them taking the time or thinking it's necessary to go and get some more credit points like lawyers do. I think it would be interesting if something totally unknown to them or their field or their expertise was presented, and then it might be worth it. But it's hard to, with the busy schedules and the demands of clients, to put aside some time for those credits. I know the legal profession requires it, but it's a little more complex because new things come up all the time in the legal world. It's not quite true for PR.
Good. I just have one last question for you then. Briefly put, the Arthur W. Page Center at Penn State is committed to fostering integrity in public relations. Could you suggest a few ways that a program like this can be even more effective in educating and
a program like what we had,
the Page Center, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yes. What can this center do to foster integrity beyond our own center, and prepare students, but also reach out to to the practice to encourage
I think
encourage ethics?
maybe PR, some more PR for the Arthur Page Society, that it's an organization of resource, of credibility, that that agencies and individuals in agencies and solo practitioner can go back to as a reference, or for help, for counseling.
So you're saying offer counseling then
Yeah.
to the profession.
Absolutely. I can tell you a story, if you want, about a mistake. We learn from our mistake. And the mistake led me to offer my resignation to Rudolphin. And it was turned down. And this is the story. It was during the Swiss bank and the Holocaust period. The government of Switzerland was a client. And there was a conference in London on Nazi gold. And during the war, as you know, the Germans looted all the central banks and took gold from those banks. And when the war was lost to them, some gold was found and redistributed to the different countries proportionally to what had been taken. And there was a commission called the Tripartite Commission that was dealing with this gold issue. But 50 years later, there were still 2 or 3 million worth of gold left undistributed. And the question was, what should we do about it? So the Minister of Foreign Affairs in London and invited governments, everyone, for this conference. And the Swiss didn't want to go. And we said, you have to go. If you're not there, you're absent, it's not good for you. It means that you're guilty, you're guilty by your absence. You have to be there. So they said, okay, what do you suggest? So we said, okay, we suggest an event at the Swiss embassy, and we're going to invite the media, and we're going to invite a historian rabbi to speak about what happened and some of the good things the Swiss had done and were doing. And they said, well, if you get 20 journalists, we'll consider it a success. So we get ready, and I recommended a very good friend of mine who's a professor at Boston University. He's also a rabbi. He's a historian, to be the speaker, and he's a great speaker. His name is Hillel Levine. So the firm was discussing him or maybe another, and they said, okay, let's go with Hillel. So we have the event. The place is packed. We have over 60 journalists, I think, the BBC, the Herald Tribune, the London Times, they were there. The event went very well, but just before the professor started to speak, he was supposed to speak for 45 minutes, and he's told, no, you can speak for 20. So they cut his time in half. So he makes his speech, very good. And then when he comes to the end, he says, and one of the lessons of all this is that it really matters where money comes from. And Switzerland should stop to allow dictators to loot their countries and then put their assets in the Swiss bank, and the Swiss bank should stop funding the drug world because we have young people dying in our streets. Okay? And you're doing this at the ambassador's residence, him in the room with the world media. So the client was not happy. And I remember he called me when I was still at the embassy, and he said, where is he? I said, he's downstairs in the lobby. He said, what is he doing? I said, he's talking to a journalist. Just get him out of there. So I called. There was a time change, so I wanted to be the first one to tell Mr. Finn what had happened. And he said, why did he say that? He said, if the press doesn't pick it up, the ambassador will be fine. We'll come down and everything will be fine. next day, front page of the newspaper, our hats to Switzerland and the Swiss government to be able to organize such a big event with a rabbi, and there was also Israel Singer, who was from the World Jewish Congress, and just not a word about his last couple sentences. But the client was still not happy. So my friend wrote an apology, a letter of apology, and I brought it to the ambassador. And I've never heard a man bark, but I think I did that time. It was like, wow, took that letter. And then I saw, when we got back to New York, a couple of weeks later, I saw a letter from the ambassador talking about the disaster of London. And I thought, you know, I just joined the firm. I didn't bring any big clients. And now I'm about to cause them to lose an important client. So maybe I should resign. So I went to Mr. Finn. I said, sir, if my resignation helps in the relationship with the client, you have it. He said, no. He said, number one, you're never responsible for what another one says. Number two, he said, you're a good man, we don't want to let you go. And he said, number three, Hillel is a good man. We don't want, he's a good man. It's just that the Swiss are difficult. So that was my resignation turned down.
What did you learn from that?
What did I learn from that? You know, it was an accident in a way. In fact, he was right. And the government has changed now its laws, and the Swiss banks have changed their laws. They're much more careful as to who comes in, where the money comes from. It's quasi impossible to open a bank account in Switzerland now, unless you can prove the origin of the money, how you got it, documents to prove it, just to make sure that the money is not dirty money. So he was right, but it was not the right time or the right place. And he really felt, my friend felt really bad. I don't think he did it intentionally.